The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Introductory lecture by Lisa M. Kendrick. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde was born in 1854 in Dublin, Ireland, and died in 1900 in Paris, France. He was a playwright, a novelist, a poet, and an editor. Mostly, though, he is considered one of the greatest playwrights of the Victorian era, even though he only wrote and produced 9 plays. Having said that, he only wrote one novel, and that is this one, The Picture of Dorian Gray. But he did write many short stories and poems. He is renowned for his dramatic portrayals of the human condition, particularly the social expectations that were in place at the height of the Victorian era. He had graduated from Oxford in 1881. He immediately became a published poet, and he lived with his friend Frank Miles, a popular painter. Early in life, he toured the United States, Britain, France, and Ireland, lecturing and writing. And then in 1884, he married Constance Lloyd, taking a job with a magazine. But in 1891, Oscar met Lord Alfred Douglas, a son of the Marquis of Queensberry. Within 4 years, Alfred's father had sued Oscar, charging him with homosexuality. Unfortunately, a crime considered at the time punishable by jail time. And Oscar did serve 2 years in prison for his love affair with Alfred Douglas. Afterwards, Oscar never recovered. He spent the rest of his life wandering, penniless through Europe, and then died of meningitis. The novel tells the story of a man named Dorian Gray, who is the subject of a painting by an up-and-coming artist named Basil Hallward. Through Basil, Dorian meets the aristocrat Lord Henry Wotton, who is so mesmerized by Dorian's beauty. Dorian is intrigued by Henry's debauchery and spirals down a dark path with him. At the outset, Henry tells Dorian the only thing worth pursuing in life is beauty. Dorian is upset by this as he knows that beauty fades, and he wished that his new portrait, just painted by Basil, would age instead of him. Magically, his wish comes true. Whether through it was the fervor of his wishing or the skill and the love that Basil clearly has for Dorian, the portrait, as the novel plot unfolds, the portrait shows the ravages of time and the ravages of the poor health choices that Dorian makes rather than Dorian. Dorian himself remains angelic and young in appearance, while everyone else around him shows their age and lifestyle. At this point, Dorian has become untethered by his conscience, and so he spirals into a truly ugly person until, in an act of vengeance, a character he has wronged discovers him and the secret of his portrait and seeks to destroy him. There are quite a few themes that unfold in this novel. One is the idea of duplicity. You have the public human face of Dorian Gray, and you have his hidden image that only he knows about. We also have the idea about the purposes of art. Is it for politics or some higher purpose, or is it simply for beauty? There's also this idea of almost worship of youth and beauty. And rolled in with that, the superficiality of society, a theme we find in pretty much every single one of his pieces. And then lastly, that idea of negative influence. Almost as if he has the angel of Basil on one shoulder and the devil of Henry on the other. And because he has this magic painting and there's no repercussion, he jumps right in with that devil and what happens when one does that. Those themes are clearly defined by the rolling in of several key allusions. First of all, we have the Gyges ring. It's a Greek myth in which Socrates tells a story about this ring. He said that no matter what a person looks like physically, their soul will be disfigured by evil. And when given the opportunity, it's human nature to take advantage of justice. Gyges of Lydia was a shepherd. After an earthquake, a cave was revealed in a mountainside where he was feeding his flock. Upon exploration, Gyges discovered it was a tomb with a giant corpse. On the finger of the dead man was a ring that Gyges took. He soon discovered that the ring could make him invisible. Using this power, Gyges seduced the queen, killed her husband, managed to become the king of Lydia himself. Plato also used this story to say that no man is so good that he can't resist the temptation of being able to do anything and take this power. Next, we have Illusion 2, and this was from something more contemporary to Oscar Wilde, and that's Richard Wagner's opera Tannhauser, which tells the story of a medieval singer whose art is so beautiful that he causes Venus, the goddess of love, to fall in love with him. She then offers him eternal life, but he is not happy with this immortal existence and he decides to return to reality. He goes through many hardships, and he is censored for his sensuality and eventually dies searching for the love of a virtuous woman. Next, we have illusion number 3, which is a Faustian one. There are tons of what we call Faustian legends. They all involve selling one's soul to the devil, and sometimes one could argue all the tales of outwitting death go along a similar format. In any case, in both stories, the original Faust tale and in this one, The Picture of Dorian Gray, the lead character entices a beautiful woman to love him, and then in the Faust story, kills her and her brother. Dorian doesn't make any deal with a devil per se, but in a way he does. He leads his life of innocence on one plane, and he is pretty much literally a devil on the other. Furthermore, as I've mentioned, Henry plays sort of this devil character. He's the thing convincing Dorian. He's the whispering in his ear that the only way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it, resist it, and you'll grow sick with longing. And Dorian can't seem to break from that cycle once he goes down that road. Our final illusion is an allusion to a story concept, but it's literally also the name of a character, Sybil Vane, in this novel. Sybil has quite a long history. It's thought to possibly have come from the Greek word Sibylla, but may have come from earlier words. They were seeresses who were known as the Sibyls of antiquity, and they supposedly prophesied at holy sites. They were thought to prophesy the word of an earth goddess. The first records are found in the second millennium in Mari and then later in Assyria. By the 5th century, this has traveled to Greece. By that time, the name Sibella was given to a single inspired prophetess. The term is used often in Renaissance writings and is in several of Shakespeare's plays. So this is definitely taking on a classical idea and pretty much modernizing her for Oscar Wilde's time period into a character who suffers tremendously. There are not a lot of symbols in this play, but the ones that are there are huge and overreaching. We have the painting itself, this idea of art bringing life and the beauty of art living forever, although in this case it was obviously flip-flopped to the person being that piece of beauty rather than the painting. We also have the Yellow Book, which is talking about a specific book that was associated with the idea of carpe diem, seizing the day, living for the moment, seizing what you wanted, giving into it, that sort of thing. Dorian Gray buys into this. Henry Wotton gives him this book. It is referenced throughout the novel. And then, of course, also the stage slash opera, okay, and how we look a certain way. I mean, yes, we have the idea of the opera itself that Sybil Vane participates in, but the idea of life as a stage in general, especially Dorian Gray's life, because he looks a certain way, as if he has on, makeup and he is lit properly and no one else is. Now we can roll into the characters. Dorian Gray, of course. He is someone who appears handsome, and he is a wealthy and young. He is a gentleman of good breeding. He has a portrait made by Basil Hallward, and under the influence of Lord Henry Wotton, Dorian becomes concerned with the transience of beauty and begins to pursue his own pleasure above all else. Then we have Lord Henry Wotton, that bad influence, a nobleman, a close friend of Basil and Dorian Gray. He is perpetually ready to criticize everything associated with Victorian society. He is all about seeking pleasure and this philosophy called hedonism, which espouses garnering experiences that stimulate the senses without regard for morality. Basil Hallward is in many ways the opposite of Lord Henry, though he knows Lord Henry, and that is how he meets Dorian at a party. Once he meets him, he kind of becomes obsessed with him. He claims that Dorian possesses a beauty so rare that it helps him realize a new kind of art. Through Dorian, he says he finds the lines of a fresh school. So Dorian becomes his muse, and he claims that his portrait of him is his masterpiece. Then we have Sybil Vane. She's from a very poor family, but she's gorgeous and she's very talented singer and actress. Dorian falls head over heels in love with her. However, when she finds love and happiness with him, it compromises her ability to act. She realizes that once she's known true love, she doesn't need to escape in the falseness of acting. And this breaks Dorian's heart. James Vane is her brother. He is a sailor who's headed for Australia. He looks out for his sister, and he worries about her relationship. He doesn't trust Dorian. He is also distrustful of his mother's motives, and he believes that his mother, Mrs. Vane, will, make this match for Sybil against everyone's better judgment. And he is hesitant to leave and threatens Dorian he'll come after him if anything happens to her. So, in a really quick take, what is the takeaway here? Well, it's mostly about life's passions. What is too far to go when seeking pleasure? For Henry, there is no limit except a boundless sea of selfishness. Wilde is playing with the idea here without rolling in monstrous ideas like vampirism or lycanthropy, being a werewolf, both popular in the time period, of what would happen if one were wealthy, young, and beautiful, and one's behaviors would not lead to aging or ill health. In this scenario, it does not lead to a life of helping others, but of solely superficial pursuits until the monster inside can no longer be contained by any level of public veneer.